ja sam Dario, jedan od koorganizatora. Danas imamo novi place i novi space za Meetup. Očito prvi put smo zapravo u konferenciji ovdje, zadnji put smo bili u lobiju, tako, jedini put, tako, kad si ti imao toliko o GRPC-u. U biti današnji Meetup je hosta Butterfly MX. Ovo je prvi put da neka remote firma hosta Meetup, koliko ja znam, pa je nekakav presedan, možda možemo to leverageat u budućnosti za neke meetupe. Pice dolaze u 8 sati, 4 miješane, 3 slavonske i 2 neke mite, super, neke vegetarijanske, ko nije za meso i to. Pa u 8 sati se dolje spustite, ako ću ja pričati, ono neće mi biti problem to kada ćete otići, ako stavim sam. Službeno ću završiti top, ne sekirajte se. Osim toga, imamo danas za najavu zdravo, Bade, slobodno, di god hoćeš. Imamo najavu, gdje je gospod Zoran? Gospod Zoran, izvolite. Imamo neku konferenciju, pa će nam gospod Zoran sad reći točno o čemu se radi. Da promotamo još nekog, onda ću još malo o Butterflyu, pa ćemo krenuti sa tokovima. Izvolite.
Ovo je možda treći put u životu da mi neko kaže gospodin.
Ja
Hvala na tome. Flyeri su za konferenciju koja se zove CitCon. Stavit ću ih ovdje, ili mogu ih poslati oko...
Tu ih samo stavite na...
Evo, tu, ako nekog zanima, ja ću u 5 minuta da ne trošim puno vremena. Open Space konferencija od 2006. Nekakve face iza toga su koje su radile prije za Atlassian. To sam krivo rekao. Nije Atlassian, Defowler radi, ko zna. ThoughtWorks, bravo. Znači, organizatori su dva Amerikanca koji su radili u ThoughtWorksu, Bruce Eckel, Martin Fowler, ako ste čitali Thinking In knjige, onda ih možda zvonite, Martin Fowler, CTO ThoughtWorksa. Oni su imali konferenciju gdje su skupili neki uži krug ljudi, oni kažu stavili ih na planinu i tamo nije bilo agende, nije bilo zadane misije, nego ajmo sad mi pričat, pa ajde vi predlažite teme i idemo sad malo pričati o tome. To je koncept Open Space, Unconference, Barcamp, takva stvar. Teme su Continuous Integration, Continuous Delivery, jako puno soft skillsa, AI, takve neke stvari. QR kod je ovdje. Ako odete na taj website i pogledate, ima Register Now gumb za 0, se možete registrirati. Donacije su dobrodošle. Dobit ćete cugu klopu, trebate potrošiti petak popodne i subotu skoro cijeli dan. Petak popodne se formira agenda, subotu se priča, šećete između soba, pričate o čemu god želite, šta god vam je interesantno, tamo se pridružite. Šta još trebam reći? Donacije su jako dobro došle. Počinju od 15, završavaju na 100 eura, ali kažem možete za 0 doći. 24. 25.5. to je petak i subota. I ja mislim da sam možda sve rekao, ako neki detalj vam možda nije jasan ili trebam vam objasniti, uhvatite me. Zadnja stvar, kao pitch, odite na taj website, kliknite na wiki, pogledajte prošle konferencije, ima popis sessiona sa njih, pa ćete vidjeti teme koje se i da li vam to odgovaraju. To je to. Hvala puno.
Pardon, morao sam po koordinatoru. Evo, imamo dva. Situacije spašene. Ok. Dobro. Prvi talk s kojim ćemo danas krenuti, imamo 3 toka. I zapravo ideja među organizatorima je bila da malo svičamo format, angažman, community, jer nije baš najjači, dosta je teško doći do tokova. Čak i kad sam ja pustio za one koji su RubyZG Slacku poruku za to koje možda da li neko ima light talk, samo jedna osoba se javila. I ona nije bila spremna za danas. Tako da, angažirali smo Radana još jedan put da uleti i popuni prazninu. I Josip se javio po prvi puta, pa da, i ja sam odlučio imat talk, tako da smo uspjeli za danas složiti tokove. Ali velim format je drugačiji, imat ćemo 2 light talka, trebat će 5 do 10 minuta. Očito imamo dovoljno vremena, nismo išli na knap, imamo 2 sata, ja neću baš toliko puno pričat, ali je ideja da taj treći talk bude nešto dulji talk, tako da ja sam ciljao oko 45 minuta i u 8 sati dolazi pice, jemat ćemo se dolje družiti. To je kratko to. Radan, Josip, hoćete da vas se snima ili ne, kak ste?
Meni je okej.
Ti? Da, svi hoće biti popularni. Dobro, ok, Josipe, ti si onda prvi na redu. Slušamo Josipa o Neovimu, novo vrijeme, novi Vim. Josip, take it over.
Može. Dobar dan svima, pozdrav, ja sam Josip Frkin, dobrodošli na prvi Lightning Talk. Začuđujuće je dosta teško napraviti Lightning Talk, mislim ispod 10 minuta, jer stvarno se ne stigne puno toga ispričati 10 minuta, ali potrudit ćemo se, napravit ćemo što više možemo. Uglavnom dobrodošli na Talk, Talk se zove Rails PDE, Neovim Series. I sada to će biti kao u neka 3 formata, 3 parta, pa ćemo čisto malo pogledati šta ćemo u kojem partu pričati. Znači danas je plan proći neki malo teoretski dio općenito o tekst editorima, o IDE-evima, što su, za što se koriste neke različite vrste. Uvešćemo novi pojam PDE, koji je relativno novi pojam općenito u community, najpoznatiji među Neovim community. I na kraju ćemo pričati kako se Neovim općenito uklapa u cijelu tu priču PDE-a. U drugom partu bi dive deepo u Neovim, pogledati koja je njegova config struktura, pogledati kako možemo importati pluginove, kako možemo customizati, cijelu našu konfiguraciju, pluginove koje uzmemo. I na kraju ćemo još malo pogledati koji su već pre-made konfiguracije, neko najpoznatijih su tipa NVChat, Astrovim, Lunarvim, možda neko čuo za to. I na kraju u part 3 ćemo se fokusirati na Rails specific pluginove, znači customizat ćemo svoj development environment da bude optimiziran za Rails development. Znači, specifični pluginovi i specifična konfiguracija i bacit ćemo još malo oko na workflow kako ćemo sve to ukomponirati u jedan cijeli paket. Pa onda krenemo vrlo jednostavno. Tekst editori. Svi znate, svaki operacijski sustav ih ima. Šta su to? Pa to su u biti programi koji editiraju tekst. Znači, otvorimo neki tekst, ukucamo neke karaktere i spremimo. Super. Kako ćemo ih podijeliti? Znači, postoje neke dvije velike podjele tekst editora, neki su plain text editori, neki su rich text editori. Plain text editori editiraju karaktere. Karakteri mogu biti u različitim encodingzima, ASCII, UTF-16 i 8 i to je to. Znači, tak se spremi u memoriju. Rich text editori, oni imaju malo više informacija, oni imaju neke meta podatke o samom tekstu, da li je boldan, da li je on italics, underline, tipa za paragraf i za cijeli tekst, da li ima neke margine, indentatione i takve stvari. Nas zanimaju za sada samo plain text editori, najčešće koriste monospace fontove da bi bili puno pregledniji postupcima. E sad, neki basic feature-i koje očekujemo od svakog, čak i najosnovnijeg tekst editora, su bilo koji feature-i koji se bave samom manipulacijom teksta. Znači to je cut, copy, paste, imamo neki find and replace, imamo isto undo, redo ako nešto slučajno zeznamo da možemo poništiti te akcije. E sad, s vremenom se tekst editori malo evoluirali, došli su neki advanced feature-i. Znači neki od njih su syntax highlighting, text folding i ono što je najbitnije extensibility, znači mogućnost tekst editora da importa različite pluginove u sebe. E sad, tako su nastali isto tako specijalizirani editori. To su zapravo editori koji u sebi imaju cijeli paket funkcionalnosti koji je potreban za obavljanje nekog zadatka. Tako, na primjer, imamo source code editore. To su tekst editori koji su baš specijalizirani za editiranje source code. I sad, kratko pitanje, sve vas zna neko koji je najpopularniji source code editor, koji se klasificira baš kao source code editor.
VS Code.
Tako je, VS Code. Znači VS Code nije IDE, nije običan tekst editor promoter, nego je baš specijalizirani source code editor. Od drugih specijaliziranih imamo IDE-evi, oni su full-blown editori, koji se zapravo koriste najčešće na većim programskim projektima. I imamo tekst editore, mislim imaš puno više opcija, ali postoji i tekst editori, oni se zapravo bave sa rich tekstom, koji najčešće koriste neki matematičari, fizičari, kada pišu neke znanstvene notacije, jednadžbe i takve stvari. Pa ajmo onda zapravo pogledati za IDE. Znači, ne postoji ni jedna specifična definicija IDE-a. Ovo sam izvukao neke definicije sa popularnih stranica, mjerodavnih, ali nijedna nije baš pogodila cijelu srž. Znači, cijela srž IDE-a je da je to program koji ima cijeli paket funkcionalnosti koje su potrebne da se napiše kod, izbilda i pokrene. Naravno, ima još i debugger da možemo otkriti greške koje naravno uvijek pišemo i to je to. Znači, osnovne funkcionalnosti koje editor mora imati da bi se klasificirao kao IDE ili Integrated Developer Environment su source code editor, build automation tools i sami debugger. I sad, znači, oni su zamišljeni, znači, kao cijeli paket funkcionalnosti koji nam je potreban da to napravimo. Imaju slične user interfejse da bi se osjećali kao da su svi međusobno povezani. To je cijela poanta. Kada koristimo, na primjer, Git unutar IntelliJ-a, puno je različitoća nego kad koristimo neki drugi alat za Git. I sad, tu u priču dolazi PDE. PDE, kratica, je Personalized Development Environment. To bi bio neki middle ground između nekih basic text editora i cijelih Integrated Development Environmenta. Znači, kad imamo PDE, moramo ga sami konfigurirati. Znači, to je kao neka boljka ili za nekog to je neka pozitivna stvar. Koji requirements treba imati PDE da bi bio PDE? Znači, mora imati coding basics-e, code intelligence, composition of tools i mora biti scriptable i extendable. Sad ćemo pogledati šta to sve znači. Znači, od coding basicsa mora imati, naravno, syntax highlighting, mora imati cijeli code folding, mora imati find and replace i sve stvari koje zapravo treba imati source code editor. Onda bi se tako trebao imati code intelligence. Code intelligence ćemo riješiti preko LSP-a. LSP je, znači, language server protocol koji komunicira sa language serverom koji svaki jezik implementira za sebe. Super talk u LSP-u je prošli put imao kolega Marko, pa savjetujem da pogledate taj talk ako imate gdje za pogledat. Šta nam omogućuje LSP? Omogućuje nam neki code completion, omogućuje nam go to definition, go to implementation, možemo hoverat preko nekog dijela teksta pa dobijemo odmah neku dokumentaciju koja argumente prima i to je to. Šta dalje želimo od našeg personal development environmenta? Želimo taj composition of tools, znači ne želimo izmišljati toplu vodu, želimo koristiti postojeće alate, kao što su na primjer RubyZG, da pretražimo na primjer u svim failovima koje imamo riječ article. I onda želimo uzeti taj rezultat i s njim napraviti što god želimo. Možemo ga pipati u neku quick fix listu, možemo ga pipati na neki zasepan window, ovo to je konkretno teleskop plugin za Neovim koji nam odmah izlisti, znači, sve rezultate i na kraju nam prikaže kratki preview tog fajla. Znači, želimo uzeti postojeći alat i integrirati ga u naš development environment. Isto tako želimo accessibility, želimo mogućnost dodavanja novih funkcionalnosti. Znači, ako kreiramo naš development environment i želimo koristiti Git, moramo implementirati neki plugin za version control. Ako želimo, možemo dodati directory navigation, da se možemo kretati po strukturi koda, možemo dodati, na primjer, debugger i tako u konačnici zapravo možemo napraviti i sami svoj IDE. Ali bi to bio naš IDE i zato bi se zvao Personalized IDE. Znači, Neovim sam po sebi nije IDE, on je zapravo text editor, ali ima tu mogućnost postati neki development environment. Jako je još labave su definicije pa nije jasno definirano. I sad, zato ćemo odabrati Neovim. Znači, kakve veze Neovim ima s tim? Kao što smo rekli, Neovim je zapravo text editor sa mogućnostima dodavanja različitih pluginova. S tim pluginovima kreiramo zaseban personalized development environment. Dosta je lightweight, znači mislim da kada se instalira ima samo nekih 25 MB i funkcionalnosti koje ima su jako basic, znači to su samo funkcionalnosti vezane uz editiranje teksta. Znači nema nikakav code intelligence, nema nikakav coding basic stvari kao što su syntax highlighting, code folding i takve stvari. I to je to. Jedno što ima extensibility i ima composition of tools koje možemo napraviti. Znači, za razliku tipa od Vima, koji za konfiguraciju koristi Vimscript, Neovim se odlučio koristiti Lua. Lua je jedan lightweight programming language s kojim možemo napraviti jako puno stvari. Znači, možemo interaktirati sa alatima na operacijskom sustavu, možemo koristiti arraye, dictionary, all the good stuff. Koristimo isto tako Neovim zato što već ima jako velik ekosustav svih pluginova. Znači, više manje za sve što možete zamisliti, postoji neki plugin. Znači, za directory navigation postoje pluginovi, code searching, GitHub, debugger, sve što padne na pamet. Ako neki plugin ne postoji, uvijek ga možemo sami napisati. To je naravno malo teže, treba puno više znanja, ali možemo. I tako lakšemo život sebi i potencijalno nekom drugome. I u konačnici, zašto bi htjeli? Neovim, zapavanje. Znači, startamo od nule i od nule kreiramo svoj environment. Imamo svoj language server, imamo language server protokol, ali definiran znači, po našim željama. Imamo svoj debugger, biramo kako ćemo si koristiti različite alate kao read grep, gdje ćemo ih pipat. ako koristimo, na primjer, Vim test, isto možemo birati šta ćemo napraviti sa outputom i u biti, znači, napravimo točno svoju verziju IDE-a, takozvani Personalized Developer Environment. I to je to. Ima kakvih pitanja?
Yes, imamo vremena za Q&A, tako da fire off.
Kad će drugi i treći dio?
Sljedeći tokovi.
Ko bi treba nekom ko koristi Vim, ko ja,
Dobro.
da setupira Neovim?
Skoro pa ništa, zato što je Neovim Vim compatible. Znači Vim script se može cijeli importati u Neovim i on će ga podržati i iskoristiti.
Imaš neke resurse za to?
Imam, poslije. Imaš, help, Vim from Vim.
Help,
to je to.
To je, help, hot set, tutorial. Stanko, ti koristiš Neovim?
Da, možeš samo copy-paste config, samo moraš promijeniti direktorij, sve
Kad sam
radiš.
namišljio ko bi mogu koristiti
Da,
Neovim.
ja sam prošli tjedan prešao na lazy Vim, kao gotovi config.
Aha. To je ono ko neka distribucija Neovima, ili kaj?
Da, kolunar i ovaj...
Vrlo rastro.
Ok, zdravo. Možeš slobodno. Zicu tamo ili kraj rada?
Ja bi čisto probao kratki servi, ako ste za.
Možeš samo jedno pitanje?
Može.
Pretpostavljam da koristiš
Da.
Neovim za Rails. Da li si uspio ikakav prettifier upogoniti za ERB failove i da radi?
Ne, trenutno nisam koristio ono, nikakve ERB failove.
Aha,
sad pa
ne.
onda još nisam. Šta imaš problema s tim, ili?
Ne želi raditi.
To je jedna boljka PDE-a što zapravo sami morate rješavati svoje probleme. Ono. Toolovi nisu međusobno integrirani kao na samom IDE-u. Ali uglavnom,
Jesi uspio nekako, ja sam samo jednom probao nešto, taj LSP postaviti, nisam uspio ući u definiciju metode ako je nekom ženu definirana. To radi ili ne?
može se postaviti. Znači, LSP po defaultu znači, ima jedan fajl u kojem su navedeni svi excludovi koje ne koristi. Mislim da test fajlove ne koristi gemove i još neke stvari. Znači, samo se može overwrite taj config file da se koristi i svi gemovi. Naravno, treba će malo više vremena da sve to...
Koliko pluginova sveukupno treba da se podesi LSP Neovim?
Pluginova da se podesi LSP? 3-4 da ima cijele funkcionalnosti.
A možeš sam napisati pa će biti jedan.
Mislim da ti je jedan ti sam da kao taj LSP funkcionalnost, ono hover i go to definition i to, a drugi ovaj Mason, on ti instalira te LSP-eve i konfigurira ih za tebe, tako da ti ne možeš ništa raditi.
Ima i snip i
da.
za jedan.
Snip ti je koristan, on ti kao general, kao onaj snippet tool. Dakle, on će ti kao, kad dođeš kreneš nešto pisati, on će ti krenuti ispisivati snippet, on je kao pluginable. Pa onda možeš unutra si dodati copilot i šta god dalje koristiš. Tako da teoretski ti je samo jedan potreban, sad ovo sve ostalo je bonus.
No, pitanje za vas. Ko od vas koristi kao daily editor nekakav IDE? RubyMine, IntelliJ, Visual Studio? Ok, ne, Visual Studio, ne Visual Studio. Aha. Ko koristi Visual Studio kod? Dobro, dosta. A Neovim?
Ti radim.
Ok.
Preći sa Sublime.
Da, pred godinu dana.
Nećeš plaćati?
Ne, još sam platio sam.
Pa znam da si imao. Da,
Ne,
što da vam pričali kao?
Segfaultovi,
Hoće sam ga koristiti zato što
čak prebacio sad
sam
config u
Rust
Lua.
debugger jedino radi sa VS-Code. Onda sam skužio da mi je dobar za ruku.
Practical. Sorry.
To nije mi se nikad srušio.
Ok,
Eventualno
Josip,
jedan
hvala ti
plugin
još
mi
jednom.
srušio.
Ok, ne, ide Radan. Zaboravio sam spomenuti Josip, hoćeš da možeš i na engleskom.
Što to vaše bilo?
I na engleskom.
Možete se na engleskom ili na hrvatskom?
Suit yourself. Mislim da je ljudima sve jedno.
Na njemačkom, ajde.
Svi ove kombinacije izlažu.
Nema kompetitivne prednosti.
Radan. To ti plugin za fazi sebi.
To ti zvako vidiš VS Code. Kad srčiš.
Finala ili kao...
Baš kod, u principu pozadini ti poziva repair, isto ti kod da ATK konfigurira za repair.
Imaš harpun, recimo.
Jedino što bi htio možda taj language server.
Puno je išlo dosta server. Paket jako korisno. Pogotovo ako se setupa ovoga...
Ali radi na starom rimu.
Okay, I'll do it in English since Dario will do it in, I know he'll do it in English, and for the amazing reach that this video will have in the international audience. I think, can you see all right? This is bigger? Actually, I don't need to do this. I can make it bigger. Okay. Can you read it back in the Laza?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I said you're gonna speak in English, so I'm gonna do it in English to Dario to increase the amazing international reach of
Thank you, Radan.
this recording. Okay. So just shortly, I'm gonna show a small technique for kind of drawing out normalizers with just plain Ruby. So here, imagine you have an application, you have an article, and you got some normalizers to increase the reach of your blog post. So here, actually, this one. So like here, you got an article, and it's got a boring title. So you add some clickbait, you make it uppercase, you add exclamation marks. And the normalizer just works like this, okay? So now is that you want to kind of, let's say there's some functionality here which is shared. It's a little bit contrived example, but it could be much more complex. At this point you might reach for a gem. There are gems which are like, oh yeah, you can compose normalize and so on, but quite often a gem might be an overkill because Ruby at the 8.3.3 has nice functionality like, for example, composition of lambdas. So let's say we say uppercase, and we say so we make this one, and then we also say snake case, and we make that that little lambda, where we're going to say we're just going to use this. And now if we say normalize it, we can compose it. We can say uppercase it, and then you do this operator. This neat little operator that does the same thing. And if we go back to our example, let's see, is it working? Yeah, it's still doing the same thing. So what this operator does, it's going to compose the two lambdas. So it's going to output a new lambda, it's going to feed it into the first lambda, and then feed the output into the second lambda. And if you had flipped it around, if you use the other one, it would go first to that one and then to the first one. And that's the essence of kind of drying it up, but since this would be short even for a lightning talk, I thought, well, why don't we kind of add a tiny introduction to DSLs? So we might add a DSL like this. We say norm, and we say block. And we're going to introduce a new class that I just happen to have here. I just need to save it. Who would have thought? So useful. So this is a class which has the content that I have in the other one, and it defines some methods here. It defines our uppercase from before. It defines snake case. It defines adding exclamation marks, which we had, and adding clickbait with the same sentences from before. And how we're going to use it, we're going to, bear with me for a moment, if you don't know where I'm going. We're going to say norm.new.instance.exec, and we're going to feed it the block. And then when we go back here, we say we don't need this anymore. We can get rid of that. Let's leave that for a moment. We'll just do this one here. We get rid of that, and we're going to say with norm, and then we're going to open a block, and we're going to say uppercase, snake case. We're just going to do it like this. Low. Let's see if it's still working. No, what did I do wrong? Right, I didn't actually. So it has to be on the sets. And it's working. So what's happening here to unpack it? We're calling the norm method, which instantiates this norm object, which has these methods here, which quite happily create a bunch of lambdas. And then it's calling instance exits on it. So the content, the code in the block is going to execute as if it's executing within the context of the object on which we called instance exit. And if you've tried to dig into most DSLs, at some point under the layers and layers of indirection, you're gonna find this. Either this or its sister instance level or some variation of that. I think this is the cleaner one because it deals with actual invoking Ruby code that's going to compile. It doesn't parse Ruby code on the fly. So what's happening here in the article, this is executing in the context of a norm object which has this all method. So what we're doing here, upcase returns a proc, and snake case also returns a proc, and then we combine it together, and that produces a lambda which is returned from this method. So the result of this is that we have created a lambda object which is a combination of upcase and snake case. And then we can, in a similar manner, we can clean this one up as well. We can also say norm, and then we can see what we're doing here. We can say we first upcase it, then we add exclamation mark, then we add, what's that? Then we add clickbait, and then we, what did we call it? We exclaim it. And now we don't need this, now we don't need this, it should be the same thing. Yes. So, this now cleaned up pretty nicely. We didn't actually add any new gem. Somebody new to pick it up, they just need to read very few lines of code. And you can take it in the direction in which you want to take it. And another benefit of cleaning it up like this is it becomes much easier to modify it. Because notice if we change the order of these, because this is the order in which they feed. So we say add clickbait upcase and exclaim it. Then now everything is upcase. And that's it.
Yeah, any questions for Radan? Okay, so I have a question. Did you use it in production?
Not specifically for normalizers, but I've used this composition and instance execs in multiple places.
Oh, okay.
But this one particularly, I didn't have any, but I will use it when I do have any. I wrote this because I tried this. I thought of this because I read a blog post by somebody. It was somewhere, and it's like a 2-page blog post about building a whole class hierarchy, and then there's a class which saves lambdas inside it and then calls them in order and everything. So basically it's like a page of code, and I was looking and I'm like, isn't this obsolete with just the decomposition operator? So I just went to try and write it, and okay, instead of 2 pages of code and 5 classes, you can just have like one, and then you can even clean it up. And
when was this added? Which version?
2.71.
Which?
2.71.
2.7.
Thank you, Stan.
The fact checker in second
I
row.
had a talk about that.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, any other questions for Radan? No. Well,
Cool.
no, it will take a minute or a few to set up. Alright, so I will set a timer just so that I don't get carried away. Okay, so first of all, I will say a few things about the company that actually made this meetup possible. So Butterfly Max is a company that produces, among other, it produces basically, it's a tech for property sector. The main product is a digital panel, or rather a smart intercom. And why people use it? Well, mostly property managers use our system so that they can access so the tenants can access the property much easier. There is a lot of architecture. I won't do a whole sales pitch here, but basically what is important for the talk today and the company in general, that we have smart intercoms, and it's doing really great. I've been in the company for the past 7 years. Stanko also has been here for 5 years. Thank you, Stanko. And what I'm going to talk about today is our technical journey of how we got from there to here. And in general, Butterfly MX team is made of 2 different teams, and there are 2, as far to my knowledge. There is a main Rails app, which is a core Rails app. It orchestrates, it communicates to both smart intercoms, mobile apps, and as well it talks to the sync service, which is the service I've developed together with my team, and and it's going to be the subject of the talk today. So I've been told that the title is quite catchy, and so I'm under a huge stress to deliver here. But yeah, basically we deleted a lot of code base, and we'll see how we made that happen. You probably won't see this, but it says that I joined in January 2017, and the visual cue on the left, which is orange, I will use the martial arts ordering system to just point out the seniority of the members in my team as it unraveled during the time. So I got some help in 2018. Another junior developer joined, and as it is with most startups, the resources were quite scarce. I needed some help, and our then CTO gave me a small amount of money and told me, yeah, hire someone. And the best I could find was a person who literally didn't know how to write a class. And he's what I would call a white belt. So Nikola onboarded, and he's with us still today. Not a white belt anymore. In the meantime, there was also another junior developer who joined after he worked for a year and a half. And then we had Vlado, which is what I would say is a black belt developer in the back seat over there. Vlado has been on Sync for a year, and then he didn't leave the company, but rather he was transferred to a different team, which is the same team that Stanko is on. Now at this point, I want to share 2 pieces of information unrelated to anything that I've mentioned so far. First one is that the average employment period in our industry is around 3.5 years. That's the first one. And the second one is that recently Netflix made a decision to appoint as a CTO a person with no technical background, rather a person with an MBA. So we'll just let these 2 points simmer here for a while. We'll come back to them later in the talk. So as I mentioned, I hope everyone can see. I didn't expect that the room is going to be this large. But basically, these are the intercoms. This is a core service, and this is a sync service. And this is the Butterfly architecture. Of course, it's not. It's very simplified. And what I've shown here is basically sync-centered overview of the architecture. There are plenty of other stuff happening here. If you want to know more about it, you can ask Stanko. He's the architectural backbone of the company, and I mean that probably in a literal sense. But back to Sync, what Sync does is basically it talks to PMSs. Now, what are PMSs? Those are just property management systems, and they are used by the property managers that purchase the smart intercom, and it's the software that they use to manage their tenants and everything about them. And when I say everything, I mean from the rent amount to the type of pets they have. Right? They have all the data on those tenants. And what Sync has to do, and the reason why Sync exists in the first place, is because the property managers didn't want to manually update tenants on their intercom every time they changed that tenant in the PMS. Right? They didn't want to add a new tenant in the PMS and then go manually have to do it in our system. So that's what Sync does. In essence, Sync it collects, it retrieves some tenant list of tenants from external source. It does something with it, which I'm going to explain a bit exactly what happens, and then sends some requests to the core service, and then core service is responsible for updating the panels, or rather intercoms themselves. Now, what is actually happening? The first thing is that the Sync fetches what we call in an internal tenant list. It's a list of tenants, like their names, phone numbers, and so on, from our core service. Then it sends a request to a third-party API. It gathers what we call an external tenant list. That's the ubiquitous language that we use. And then creates a new tenant list based on those two. Now, this doesn't sound all that too complex, and it's not. The hard part is actually something that Radan actually talked about in his talk. The hard part is parsing and normalization of the data that we retrieve from third-party APIs. And this is by far the most complex part. And to underpin and highlight of how complex it is, for example, you live in a building, right? And you live in an apartment. And your apartment has some label. Let's say it's 103. It's your surname in Croatia, but it might be 10. It might be 1A. It might be whatever, right? And that label has actually some pattern to it, right? That's not the only building in the world. There are many more buildings. And we, up to this date, we actually have 1,502 checked today number of unit label patterns that we use to match unit labels to match unit labels from the properties that we sync. So that's how many unit label patterns are there in the wild. And at the end, after the tenant list is merged, what Sync does, it just sends those requests to the core, and core then takes care of the updating the intercoms. So the progress we made from 2017. In 2017, we had 3 types of integrations. 2 of them were CSV integrations, so that's really, like all type of way of doing things, but basically we have a server, some of the customers upload their CSV to our server, we take it, we parse it, and we do the rest. And there's also like what we call remote CSV, where they give us their credentials, we connect to their server, download the CSV, and basically do the same. But those are 2 different types of integrations, and the orange circle represents an API integration. That's like a more modern. And today, we have a lot more integrations. We still support CSV integrations, but we have 10 API integrations, which are, again, in the orange, and the green circles represent actually totally semantically different type of integrations from the ones that we started with. Okay, and before I jump into criticizing and lavishing the code, I want to set some baselines, and I'm not going to be academic and super pedantic about this, but let's establish some ground rules about what good code, what principles good code should is based on. So first of all, code has to be correct. That's super self-explanatory. The second of all, code has to be performant. And I would mention that it has to be performant enough. It doesn't make a lot of sense to start super optimizing early, early optimizing, whatever that saying is the root of all evil. That's what happens when you optimize too early and too much. The third principle I'd say is important is that code has to be testable. And I don't mean that you must write, that a test should be written at the same time when the code is, but rather the code should be written in such a way that can be tested later on. If you are in a startup, and imagine that if you have a startup, how many people have a startup here, actually? Can you get some raises? Zoran, I know you did as well. But anyways, yeah, it doesn't matter. But you're in that environment, right? You move fast, you fail fast, whatever. You don't have time always to write tests like you want to, but it has to be testable. The fourth point is that it has to be maintainable. I think in that principle probably undermines what Radan, you were talking about reusability. And the way I like to think about it is that it has to be malleable, meaning it has to be easy to shape, right? It has to be easy to change. And the fifth and the last is it has to be readable. I think that this principle is heavily underappreciated in general. And by readable, I mean it has to be comprehensible, or rather, it has to be easy to understand. That is what a good code, at least for me, is, right? If there are 10 developers and they are working on the same code base, it is impossible for those 10 developers to write bad code in exactly the same way. Each developer is going to write bad code in its own way. It's going to be very, very, very special about it. But it is possible, however, for those 10 developers to write good code in a very similar way. It will probably never be identical, but we do have linters, which are a huge help here. That is possible to achieve. And I would assume that Sandy Metz would agree with this, and then she would say, most likely, that all of this is true, and then we can go a step further, and we can say that code has to be transparent, reusable, reasonable, usable, as well as exemplary, and a lot of this overlaps. Okay, so at this point I'm going to switch, we're going to browse the repository that I laid my hands on when I joined the company, and to mention an important point here is that there was no handoff from the previous developer. I joined the company with 2 colleagues, one of them being Zoran here, and the second one being Ivanik. He's not really here today with us, and there was literally no handoff, and of course everything was in production, everything was important. We didn't have the luxury of a digital agency, of a greenfield project, just work, and when you're done, you're done. There was production data, customers were complaining, and particularly when we had one customer who more than 90% of the revenue company made at that point in time was from that customer. And that's important for also for the point I'm going to mention later. So let's take a look, and I'm not sure if you're going to see anything. I'll have to switch a lot between screens, but anyways, let's give it a shot. So the repo was named Synchronizer, and it was just a basic Ruby project. It wasn't Rails, it wasn't within any framework. There was no interface. And you can basically disregard everything except the app directory. For example, the database contained just a schema, really nothing spectacular. So let's dive into the app directory and see what that's about. So you can notice that in the first level we have databases, models, and synchronizers, right? And here, let's dive into how synchronizers look like. So let's say synchronizers, and we're going to cat them. And okay, so we have many files here. They are very short, and it's easy to notice a pattern here, right? Some kind of pattern exists, which is good. It helps us. Okay, it doesn't really matter. Just do a squint test of what the code looks like. We won't go into details. But those were the synchronizers. They fired off actually the sync for the property. The second part we're going to take a look at is models. So let's open this and let's dive into something that looks like a model. So it's named a model, but it's not a Rails model because we're not using Rails. So we're in the apartment class, and it looks kind of okay. Nothing wrong with it. And indeed, I would say that this code is okay. We can take a look at another class. Again, very similar. I think, you know, it's not really neatly formatted, but whatever. It's also kind of okay. And then we can take a look at the Butterfly MX company class. Now, at this point, there were specs written and everything was tested, but this class, particularly, everything except the popular method. The reason why this wasn't tested because it's impossible to test this. You can give it your best shot if you manage to do so. Kudos to you, but we didn't bother, and the developer before us didn't bother. And this class actually, in this method, violates SRP, single responsibility. Of course, it violates lower diameter. It violates good practices on many levels. And the last thing I want to point out, let's take a look at the databases. The database classes were designed so that they use inheritance. And this is a base class, meaning the top level class, and there are only two, so at least that's good. But we have path, current path, download, and rows. Okay, so that's the interface that our subclasses should also implement. Now let's take a look at another class here, or let me try to split the window. If that's going to work. Yeah, okay. So we have Avalon database, and this database implements path, it implements current path, it implements download, as well as rows. So, okay, it's kind of quirky, but you know, there is like a huge row class nested here, but in general that's fine, it's fine, as list scope is not violated here. But what happens if we take a look at, and this is a CSV integration. This database represented the CSV integration. But Entrata is an API integration. And if we take a look at the interface in the Entrata class, we can see that it has only download and rows methods implemented, and path and current path are not. So obviously there is a discrepancy in the interface. Okay, so from here, let's move on. The first good decision that we made, and I have to give this one to Zoran, which was we decided to move from the Ruby project. Yeah, this is, anyways, we decided to move from the Ruby project to a Rails app. And the reason why that was good was, well, first of all, patterns in Rails that I would say many of us take for granted. I took it for granted, I know, because like a year ago or a year and a half, I tried doing some React stuff, and it wasn't as pleasant as Rails is. First of all, React is not a framework, and when you import React, you're left on your own. Like, how are you going to structure directories? All of those decisions that Rails already embeds are solved for you in Rails, and that's a pattern. If you need to create a controller, and you create a file, and you already know that you have to create a file in the controller's directory, that's a pattern. It's not a classic standard programming pattern such as facade or whatever, but it's a code-based pattern that you use in order to multiply your productivity, 2x, 5x, whatever x, doesn't matter. It will make you more productive. So I'll try and zoom this in. Okay, awesome. So that was a good decision, because after we migrated to Rails, we were actually able to see those parent lists like while the sync was being performed, and it helped us a lot to debug stuff and to understand what's going on. But the first, and now I'm going to go through a series of bad decisions that we did that cost us truly a lot. It was also a matter of being fired or not being fired at some point. And I'll get to that. It's 2 slides from this one. So the first bad decisions that we did, I said that sync is fetching the internal list from the core service. And this was implemented in such a way that we created an SQL view, which is awesome. I was an orange belt, and I had no idea how to visualize all these joints in my head, right? But that's not the worst part. The worst part is, like, take 3 seconds and try to think why this is a bad code. Okay, doesn't matter if you managed or not. I'm going to tell you what happened to us. One day I came to work, you know, just another day in the office as usual, and I sat down over my laptop and all the things were broken. Nothing was working. And then I don't know what I started doing. I suppose I started yelling or screaming or I don't know. But anyways, what happened was that the core team decided to change their schema without communicating it to me. And all of the things broke in this point. Yeah, it was a shitty. Okay, then second bad decision. This was not as costly, but when I started to learn about patterns, you can just clean test this code. You don't have to read it. But the point is that I started learning about patterns, and there I was. This was such a cool pattern to me, visitor pattern, right? Straight from the Django 4 book, and I saw it here, and I wrote it. I was so exalted. I was so proud of myself. You know, did such a neat job. Everything is so cool. And then I went back after like a year, and I read this code, and I literally couldn't figure out what was happening, or why did I do that? And I was just thinking about myself like a year ago, and just like a big brother would do to a young brother when he knows that he's about to screw something up. So, anyways, here's a pattern implemented properly without any reason, right? Except for the programmer being cool about himself. For the third situation, I unfortunately don't have a slide, so it's a brief story. One day before I left the job, I triggered the syncs for our largest customer. Over 90% of the revenue were generated. They had over 150 panels on their buildings. Huge thing. And I went to the gym and I felt really good. And as I got to the gym, the CDO called me and told me, Dario, like, we have a problem, sync is failing. And I was like, yeah, okay. Go, I've just executed syncs for their properties like 20 minutes ago. And he told me, yeah, it's not just that sync is failing. None of the tenants on their panels are showing up. That was the point I almost got fired. And the reason why this happened, or that happened, is because that wasn't implemented by us, but by a previous developer. The thing is, it was a CSV integration. And if it happened that they uploaded an empty CSV on our server, the sync would say, hey, this building doesn't have any tenants, and it would erase them all. And all of their buildings had tenant lists in a single file. So that's how it happened that I deleted all of their tenants. I didn't get fired because the CTO saved me, CEO wanted me fired. Again, there was no way to know. The code was obscure and it wasn't documented nowhere. And the fourth bad decision is this one. I will enlarge this a bit, maybe just this part. So the way a sync was written at the beginning, or actually that merge part I was talking about, it wasn't called merge, it was called diff. And Zoran will remember this. The way it worked is that we fetched the internal tenant list. We created a temporary SQL table for that list in the database, our database. Then we fetched the external tenant list, did the same. And then we used an SQL union operator to merge the two tables and created a third temporary table. And the problem with this code that it needed some additional custom logic in order to handle the SQL, the result of the SQL union. So it wasn't like the SQL union did everything for us. It didn't. The problem with this code, just a moment, so I forgot it. Yeah, can you think about for 3 seconds now, why would using an SQL operator would be a bad decision here? It worked, so the sync worked. The first principle was satisfied. Try to take a few seconds, like really think about
The columns have to match, otherwise.
No. It's much simpler. It's much simpler. The thing is that once we decided to use the SQL operator, we yielded the algorithm to the SQL. Big problem. It caused a lot of trouble down the road. So today, and it was in one of our Ruby Burgers unofficial meetings, it was Bruno who actually, when I was talking about this, he mentioned like, why isn't this just pure Ruby? Like all you have to do is like compare tenants in different tenant lists, and that's how it works today. But this was the first version. You live and you learn. Okay, so I will go 2 steps back and just briefly mention inheritance in a way that when junior developers or even more senior developers think about inheritance, they think about inheritance like, I assume they think about inheritance this way, like in a pyramidal scheme. And indeed, in Ruby, it's the only way to implement inheritance because it doesn't support multiple, right? So you must have a single base class if you want to inherit from something. Then you can have one or more some intermediate sub classes, and at the bottom there is like, let's call it a child subclass. And what I found that people often they just start, they assume that most of the behavior needs to be implemented. The lower you go, the more behavior you have to put into. So the amount of behavior is proportional to this structure. When I would suggest that this is like more proper way to think about it, because if you put the most of behavior in the topmost class, then all the classes down beneath it just need to implement whatever they need to override. So I think that this diagram illustrates the point of inheritance really well. At least it clarified an issue to me. I had. So let's see what good inheritance looks like. And this was our first take at integrating properties. And before I actually dig a little bit deeper, when we migrated to Rails, we improved the code that we started working on from the previous developer. And we soon found ourselves in a situation where we had to, every time we synced a building, we had to write code for it, right? And I used inheritance to design this, and it looked like this, right? So we had a base class, and on the left, it's the one on the left, on the most left, and it has a lot of methods. Then we had like this available, which modules are inheritance, right? I'm not sure, to be honest, why this available wasn't like an intermediate class, but in any ways, it overrode some methods from the parent class, and then the building parser classes had to override only what was exclusively specific to them. And this worked really well for us. It worked, that's the number one. And we weren't close to getting fired. At least, that was the general feeling we had in the team. It looked, but I figured that something's wrong with this code. And at that moment, we were here, right? So this graph, basically, the red one is lines of code, and the purple line is complexity. So we were in a situation where we had to write code, we had to subclass for every building that we need to integrate, we had to subclass the main class and override the methods, and we had to write the corresponding tests for it. And it got to a point where we even built our own file generators that to generate both the classes and the tests. And then we only had to like fill in the gaps, right? It was cool at first. We felt really productive. Every time we synced the building, it was like, cool, I did something really, really important today. And it was a significant business value to the company, but it wasn't scalable technically, and it wasn't scalable operationally, because if we continued on that path, we would have to hire 2 developers every 6 months just to subclass stuff, which is not what we wanted to do. And So I sat and I started to think about the situation, and then I figured, like vaguely, something along these lines. Okay, what we want actually to have is that with time, I want to add a minimal amount of code, but that means that the complexity is going to become higher. And indeed, the code written in this code base could be read by a junior. It was really that simple. And the code here cannot be read by a junior. But the thing is not that we are adding complexity. We already have complexity. It was just solved incorrectly, right? So what we needed to do, the complexity is not bad. What we need to do, which is we have to find a way to manage it properly. And if we didn't do that, this is what I envision our future is going to look like. Bleak future, Dolly. Okay, so I sat down, again, I will have to highlight this. I was hoping that this will be a bit more visible. Anyways, so I have 3 different building parsers. I can't zoom in anymore. 3 different building parsers, and if we just skim across them, like it's inheritance, it's vertical, but if you look at horizontally, we will notice that there are property IDs in every building. Known building method in every building. And specific unit labels, unit label matchers in every building. And this was kind of a point where my wheel started to rotate in my head, like I was onto something. And since then I've got to think about patterns, like 1 is an occurrence, 2 is a recurrence, 3 is a pattern. With a caveat, it's most likely a pattern. It still doesn't have to be. With that said, when I see that something happens or occurs in the code base for the 3rd time, I don't just jump on it and codify it in some pattern. It's like a hint to me that when I see something for the 3rd time, I start taking notice of it and thinking about, hey Dario, you might have a pattern somewhere here. And I'll give you like 5 seconds, so please read this beautiful quote from none other than Feynman. Okay, so the thing with patterns is that they are everywhere. They are literally everywhere. Like psychologists talk about behavioral patterns, meaning every habit that you have is a pattern. It repeats over time. It's some sort of a pattern. The way I move my hands on the stage, I create some sort of a pattern. The way the sofas you sit on are structured, that's also a pattern. So what we're going to do here, we're going to play a little game. Let's try some pattern matching practice, okay? I was working on those 3 words like a lot. We'll take a look at the first picture, which is a zebra. Cool, beautiful animal. We all know the pattern that zebra has. How many patterns can you see on this image? Okay, Radan, you go.
It depends what you take for pattern.
Okay, yeah, there can be a few patterns, but if you count horizontal patterns on the zebra, it might be 2 on the. No, in general, indeed, the grass also has a pattern.
Yeah.
No grass actually grows horizontally, like it grows vertically. Yeah, we do have some.
Like 8,
some
9.
I would say 2, but sure. Then I wonder how many patterns are you going to see here. So when I was searching for this image, it was cool. I was hoping that I would find like road crossing where people will actually use zebras to cross over the road. This is like a Shibuya in Tokyo, or I'm not sure. So, and this is a lesson you might expect patterns and they will not be there. You might expect patterns in some places and they will not be there. But they will be elsewhere. Like, there are a ton of patterns in this image. Like the patterns, obviously the zebras. There is a pattern on every staircase. Every staircase has a pattern. So those are all structural patterns, right? The windows on the staircase and the path to the rails, to the subway or whatever, that's a pattern. These lines are patterns. So when you start looking at it more closely, patterns are everywhere. There's so much around us that it gets kind of creepy. So this is very interesting image. This is a hotel in France, Novotel. Like, how many patterns would you say you see here? I'm not going to ask, I'm just going to continue talking, but do continue thinking yourself. So imagine that you have to produce these units, right? You're a manufacturer, and you have to produce them. Like, what would be the most easiest way for you to produce a unit? Well, you would identify which are the same elements, and then you would go on producing them, right? And indeed, patterns are the bottom left part is a panel, upper left, upper right, bottom right. There is a pattern in the curtains even. There is a pattern between all of these units in the innermost window. Each rectangle for every unit is a pattern. So, and those are all structural patterns. In nature, also well-known patterns in the Yun, pattern in Yun, and as to our knowledge, there is no pattern in the clouds, right? They seem random. Honeycomb, hexagonal pattern as well, little bees produce. And that's all cool and nice, but we are programmers, right? And we want to know about design patterns. And design patterns come in three shapes: creational, structural, and behavioral. And creational patterns, actually, they emerge when something is being created, right? Whatever. You produce, like, for example, the pattern you use to produce the bottom left part of that unit. That would be a creational pattern. Then the structural pattern, obviously, anything that has a structure, including us, is living beings, we have some pattern, right? We all have the same structure of the body. And behavioral pattern, well, I've explained it before, the way something moves. It doesn't even have to be like organic, obviously. The whirlpool has a behavioral pattern of a spiral, and indeed, if I imagine like patterns in a computer, I can imagine like electrons firing off at the same time in the same pattern. And there are a lot of patterns. Obviously, I'm not going to go through them. You know some of them or most of them. I'm not sure. If you know all of them and know how to implement them, kudos to you. But that's the grouping of the patterns. And the one that we are particularly interested in today is a strategy pattern. And this is the pattern that actually was a turning point for our project. So what is a strategy pattern? For those who don't know, I will not reinvent the wheel here. It's a design pattern that enables us to select an algorithm at runtime. Cool. I'm not sure if I read about this pattern before I figured it out, or was it vice versa. Doesn't really matter. In any case, what I had trouble understanding when it came down to it was this red part at runtime. What does this actually mean? How do I do it? Like, I know about if-else. I can write everything in if-else, but how can I implement it? So let's write a short proof of concept of how we implemented strategy pattern. And we're going to dive into the context of taxes, just so I can get your attention. So let's give it a shot here. Okay, so let's start with a new file. I want to talk and write at the same time because I can. So we'll start with a text calculator. We will write initializer. And we'll add readers for it. And then we're going to say total amount, right? And we're going to use if-else, so if country is Croatia, we will say amount with tax is amount, and we're going to multiply by 1.25. And let's say that country is Bolivia. we're going to copy this code, we're going to change their text to 17, and then we're going to just output that we know what we're working with, creation, text. And we'll copy the code here as well. And then we are going to pass a command line argument. We will say that the amount is 100, doesn't matter. And we will execute this, so it's POC. And indeed, we get 125. If we say the media, we get 117. And that's cool, and I'm not here to demonstrate how if-else works. Okay, so the next stage, how can we improve on this code, is let's say that we want to extract logic of calculating the text, and we say creation text. And we're going to define a class method that takes our amount here. And we're going to move this code over here. And then if we want, we can add text over here, because now we are much more flexible with how we want to write stuff. We have only one single class. And we can do the same for the media. I will copy and paste here and just sort it. That this looks okay. All right, and what we want to do now, we can delete this. We want to say if country is creation, we'll say creation text, total amount, and we will pass the amount. And we will do the same for Namibia. We'll give it a go. It works. This works as well. So this is much better. Like some of the principles that I've talked earlier, also principle of reusability or maintainability, something that Radan as well spoke about, is satisfied here. But we want to go a step further. This still doesn't solve a crucial problem, which is how do I define which class to use at runtime? And as it turns out Ruby makes it really simple. We can use object. I believe it's const get. I always forget it. It's get const, I'm not sure. Stanko, is it const get, right? Okay, so we'll say country, then we will say total amount. And now we have to pass creation text because we want to work with a class. And indeed, Stanko was right, it was const get, but I'm right as well. So, Bohemian text. Okay, it's spelling error.
Namibia without the M.
Awesome, thank you. And that's it. And this simple idea is actually what literally changed the future of our project. The way we implemented it is that there is like a properties table in the database, which is associated to, let's call it a setup table. And that setup table contains names of components that property executes every time it is synced. And of course, those are strings stored in the database. They get constantized, which is Ruby gives you via active support as a constantize method defined on the strings, and that's what you get. So it's easy as that. You don't even have to work with object. And this is the pull request. I will enlarge this because it's in the title of the talk. So the project went from 1.1 thousand lines of code, which is the Ruby project, to like 80,000 or so, and then we deleted 60,000. So it was a huge change, and above everything, it was easy to extend and easy to work with. Actually, it's so easy to use that people with no Ruby experience, like one person wanted to try Ruby in our company, and we gave that person just to write those components, so that we can, when components are needed, it's that simple to write a component. And the team is comprised of product manager, who is here with us today. He's working half a day on the sync, only two developers, and a property integration specialist, which is a unique job in the world, one of a kind. Skill set is totally non-transferable, but it is what the company needed in order to grow, and that person is actually integrating properties through the interface that we've built. And okay, so we're at the end. So let's take that piece of information I shared at the beginning. So every developer, or average time that we spend in the company is 3.5 years. But for a company, or a well-established company, and her life cycle, that's a small amount of time. For us as developers, it's not. And 3.5 years is more than enough for a single person to make a significant impact on the company. And the impact is manifested through making a decision and executing on it. It's really that simple. And the second piece of information is that I mentioned is that CDO, they position like an MBA person to lead the technology department of the company. Now, at face value, it looks like a ludicrous move, but in reality, what's happening here, especially in the companies of that scale, you don't need a technical person to make business decisions, right business decisions. Because, namely, Elizabeth Stone, she won't be deciding on what kind of architecture Netflix is going to use. There are a ton of super well-paid and extra smart people who do that. She is going to make business decisions and make sure that the rest of the company, or the tech part of the company, actually rides along in the direction that company needs them to go in. And people who are technologically super proficient are the one making technical decisions and talking to her and informing her, giving her everything she needs in order to make business decisions. So not making a decision is a decision in itself. Like many things bit us in the past. There were many suboptimal developer experiences in the company. Unfortunately, some of them still happen today, even after 7 years. And what's the moral of the story? There is no moral of the story. Like this was our journey. Some other startup had a different kind of journey, but they all need to make decisions. So if there's one point that if I was forced to make one point today here and leave my thought on the stage, it would be that decision is a tool meant to be used by everyone. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO or a developer coding 8 hours a day, you have to make decisions. Every time a developer decides to implement some pattern, they have to make a decision to do so, or remove something. It's just that the scope of their decisions will probably not ruin the company, whereas the CEOs will. And with that said, I hope that the next decision, technical or otherwise, you make will be a good one. Thank you. Okay, so 45 minutes, nice. Is there anything I forgot to say? No. Okay, it's 7:50. Any questions? No questions. Radan, please go.
Yeah, if I understood correctly, what's missing is how coupled is the stuff in the database to the code? Once you removed it and it's being defined.
Yeah.
Is there any point where if you refactor the components, like the Ruby code, does it always involve a migration of the database configurations for the buildings in the database?
No, it never does. So far, since we migrated, we never had to add another type of component. We just have different Ruby components, right?
Okay.
Ruby code, and those components are universal and they can be used across any buildings or integrations of any kind. But we actually never had to add another column in the database, and introduce a new type of constant.
Then I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Do you think that the way you did this, because you refactored it when it was very mature,
Yeah,
It's quite possible if you started with that.
yeah, I would never start with that.
Yeah, that's the question.
I will-
Would you recommend
no.
going maybe not as far as 63,000 lines,
Yeah,
but maybe 10,000 lines, and
Undoubtedly.
then when it stabilizes, then do that?
undoubtedly.
Okay.
And I was safe to do it because at that point we really knew.
Yeah.
You can never know all of the customer requirements, but at that point I really basically knew everything. And
Yeah.
indeed, nothing new emerged. And
If
even,
you
if,
had- yeah.
even if it does, we can add a new column. It wouldn't break anything, anything that exists, right? We would just set this column to be default. We would allow null, and that's it.
Yeah.
But a good question. Any other questions? Josip, talkers, talk.
Yeah. So that pull request with that deleted 63,000 lines of code, it added 19 more.
Mhm.
So, so was that just
I have no idea what that was.
okay? But probably in some pull requests previous to that one,
Okay.
you added that strategy pattern.
Yeah, I
So
did.
we have it.
That's correct.
Yeah. So with how many lines did you replace those 63,000 deleted?
I think it was about 4 or 5. I believe it was 5, because we went from 80 something to 11. Yeah, it was around 5.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
So GitHub can swallow changes in 60,000.
It can, but with a caveat, that was GitHub in the past. Today you have like a directory on the left, right, and you can search files, and it renders much slowly. So I've seen pull requests much smaller than 60,000 lines of code, lasting a long time. It takes a lot of time to load the page in the browser if you want to scroll down to files. So
Yeah, but you put
Yeah.
GitHub to stress.
yeah, I did. We tested it thoroughly. Yeah. Yeah, one thing, baby, like important thing here, once we deleted the code, we weren't done. It took us 3 months actually to roll it out in totality, right? The last building that migrated on this new system was actually, it was in November, I believe, and the PR happened in like July or beginning of August, something like that. So it was a tedious job, which is what happens when you have something in production. And people are experiencing pains every time, you know, a single character changes in the database. If somebody is affected by it, then you have to be extra super careful because, again, when it's a greenfield project in a software agency, you really don't it's a luxury to work in that kind of environment and circumstances. Okay,
This is not so much a technical question.
Yeah,
I was
doesn't matter.
wondering, with those smart intercoms,
Mhm.
in case that there's an outage, electricity outage, like what's the fallback for people to get in the building or ring a bell or whatever? Is there?
I have no idea, but Stanko is here.
They are battery backed with UPS.
Oh, okay. How long?
4 hours, I think. Though it depends on your installation. Depending on what you're willing to expect, you can get up to 4 devices on the same UPS. So in that case, it would be an hour.
Yeah, please go.
Regarding your incident when you almost got fired,
Yeah.
do you feel it was your fault? Because to me it sounds like it wasn't really.
Yeah, it wasn't my fault. I never thought it was my fault, but I felt the burn, and he didn't. But yeah, I didn't feel it like it was my fault. Yeah, it never crossed my mind, but I was responsible for it, so it pretty much really didn't matter all that much. Like, it was on me to fix it, right?
What did you learn from that experience?
It's one of those questions, interview questions. From that particular experience, I didn't learn much. There was not much to learn, I think. In retrospective, like the other ways you would phrase the question is like, what could have you do differently if you were able to, like at that point in time, being very not a mature developer, I did my best, I gave my everything, and in that position, I wasn't really able to do it better. So, no, yeah, I don't have it. It happened as it happened. You know, just be careful when you're inheriting other people's code. Like, yeah, try to go through as much code as possible before feeling really good about it. If you feel really good about it and you don't understand like everything, or at least most important concepts of someone's code, then if you're feeling happy, you should be suspicious. That's what I want. Yeah, thank you for the question. Josip, again, go.
Yeah, so what was the test coverage?
The
In
test,
percent, in what percent?
when? Before or today?
No, before, when that accident happened. Because it sounds to me like it's...
No, that's the Ruby project. That wasn't the Rails set.
Oh, okay.
I think the coverage was relatively okay. I think it was like 60-70% of the code base was tested. But that populate method wasn't, right?
Oh, this was the populate method that...
It was part of the populate method, yeah.
Oh.
And,
Was it even a bug?
Sorry?
It wasn't even a bug, it was a feature, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, not for me, not for my. It's not if it's not a feature for a customer, I don't think it's a feature. So to answer the question, what was the question?
Nah, you answered.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, you can't solve that thing with the test if it's not
I
specified.
remember.
Like, you would
Yeah,
need to
you
have
can,
specified
yes.
by users what the behavior should be before you write a test. So, I mean, it's a sane decision to make a test for that, but if it's not specified and you don't know the specifications, how
Yeah,
would
and
you test?
that part is in the product manager scope. He's the one who has to gather the requirements. But on the point of testing, it's like I do not believe in 100% tested code base. I believe that the most important thing when tests are being written is that the right things are tested, and that's it. Like, if, for example, let's say that code base had 90% coverage, but the populate method wasn't. Populate method, which is like the underpinning thing in the whole code base, wasn't that. Why do I care about all that much about those 90% tests? Thank you very much, Jan. Rather than take care of it. Yeah. So anyway, that's my take on testing.
Yeah, but it seems like a basic use case. You know, if it's empty CSV.
To you, yeah.
But
I can say I don't know what the context was of that developer. Like how much time he had to write that Ruby project. It might have been that he did it with like a 5% of his time, and guys like super smart genius, whatever. I don't care. You know, he did his best. He did a great job. I don't know. I never judged him on it. What was very suspicious to me, as well as Zoran and Ivanik back then, was that there was no handoff. Like, right, if there was a handoff between us and him back then he might have mentioned, you know, if somebody uploads an empty CSV file, all the tenants will get erased. That's something that you would say on a handoff, right? Any other questions?
And who uploaded the empty CSV in the end?
Avalon customer. We downloaded it from their server, but
So it's there.
Yeah, but why did they
Yeah.
do it? It was some mistake.
no, it was mistaken their PMS. I mean, those systems are written. Those are systems from 70s and 80s. Like 70% of them still use SOAP as a protocol. So you know, there's not much flexibility there. And Avalon is one of the biggest PMSs in the US. Yeah, and yeah, good question. Any other question? Okay, well, thank you for your time. Let's do some.